Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I remember moving into that apartment complex. It wasn't new, not by a long shot. The paint in the hallways was peeling, and the carpet had that specific stale smell of countless previous tenants. It was cheap though, and in a decent location for my job. It had one amenity that I thought would be a small luxury, a little slice of peace in the otherwise unremarkable building, a swimming pool. It was a standard rectangular pool, nothing fancy. Blue tiles, faded lines on the bottom, a few metal ladders. Around it was a cracked concrete deck, and a low chain-link fence meant more for discouraging casual trespassers than actual security. There were a few sad-looking plastic lounge chairs scattered around, warped by years of sun and rain. During the day, it was sometimes used by kids or a few residents brave enough to ignore the slightly murky water. But at night, it was deserted, utterly, completely empty. That's when I started going there. After midnight, I wasn't much of a swimmer, but I found that sitting by the edge of the pool in the quiet darkness was incredibly calming. It was a simple ritual. I'd walk out, usually around 1 or 2 a.m., when the building was silent and the city hum had faded to a low drone. I'd let myself through the creaky gate. It was always unlocked, another sign of the building's lax upkeep, and find one of the less uncomfortable chairs. Then, I'd just sit and watch the water. Under the dim glow of the few security lights mounted on the building, the pool surface was like a sheet of dark glass. It perfectly mirrored the night sky above, the silhouettes of the nearby trees, and sometimes my own reflection. It was peaceful, a quiet, still escape from the four walls of my small apartment and the constant low-grade stress of daily life. I'd sit there for maybe an hour, sometimes more, just breathing in the cool night air, feeling the tension slowly drain away. The first time I noticed something wasn't quite right was a few weeks into this routine. I was sitting in my usual spot, perhaps a little closer to the water's edge than usual that night. The water was incredibly still, not a ripple on the surface. I was looking at my reflection, watching my own tired face staring back at me from the dark mirror of the water. And then I saw it, a movement. In the reflection, it wasn't my movement. My reflection was sitting still, just like I was, but behind my reflection, in the reflected image of the concrete deck and the fence, there was a shadow. It moved, just a flicker, fast and fleeting. Out of the corner of my eye, within the reflection, I turned my head instantly, looking at the actual deck behind me. Nothing. Empty. Just the worn concrete and the chain-link fence stretching into the gloom. I looked back at the water. My reflection was still there. The deck behind me was still empty in the reflection. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The security lights were old. They sometimes pulsed or flickered subtly. Maybe it was just that, or maybe a small insect had landed on the water for a split second. Yes, that was it. A bug, or tired eyes. It was late after all. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. I tried to push the image away, to return to my state of calm. But the stillness of the water suddenly felt different. It no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. The reflection felt like more than just an image now. It felt like a presence. A cold prickle started on the back of my neck. The comfortable silence of the night seemed to deepen, becoming heavy, expectant. I shifted in my chair, feeling a sudden urge to look over my shoulder again, even though I knew there was nothing there. I didn't stay much longer that night. The unease had settled in, the relaxation I sought was gone. I stood up, nodded almost involuntarily at my reflection, a strange impulse I immediately regretted, and walked towards the gate. As I left the pool area, I felt it strongly, the distinct, unsettling sensation of being watched. Not from the building, not from the trees, but from the space I was leaving behind. from the pool. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, the image of that fleeting shadow in the reflection replaying in my mind. Every creak of the apartment building sounded like footsteps in the hallway. The shadows in my bedroom seemed to stretch and writhe in the dim light filtering through the blinds. I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye, quick movements that vanished when I focused. It was just the stress, I told myself. Just my imagination running wild after a late night. The feeling of being watched persisted over the next few days. It wasn't constant, but it would come and go. Often when I was alone, or in quiet spaces, it was like a cold spot settling on my skin, or the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, checking empty corners. It was unsettling, but still, something I could mostly dismiss as anxiety. I avoided the pool for 2 nights. The third night, the pull became too strong. A strange mix of morbid curiosity and a desperate need to reclaim my little piece of peace drew me back. I needed to prove to myself that it had just been a trick of the light, an isolated incident, that I wasn't losing my mind. Walking into the pool area that night, the air felt different immediately, colder, heavier. The silence was that same deep, wrong silence I'd felt in the elevator. Sometimes, my heart started to beat faster as I approached the edge of the pool. I made myself sit down further back than usual, closer to the fence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I looked at the water. It was still, like the previous time. My reflection stared back. I watched it, and I waited. It didn't take long, maybe 5 minutes. My gaze was fixed on the water's surface, and I saw it again, clearly this time. Not a shadow behind my reflection, but a movement twist within the reflection. Down in the dark water, something moved. It was a shape, darker than the water itself. Fluid, twisting. It didn't swim like a person or an animal. It moved with a slow, unnatural grace, like smoke underwater, or ink spreading through clear liquid. It was elongated, too large for the depth of the pool. It seemed to coil and uncoil in the reflected darkness. My breath hitched in my throat, my body tensed. This was not imagination. This was not a trick of the light. This was real, or at least the reflection of it was. The shape began to rise, slowly, towards the surface in the reflection, towards my reflected image. As it rose, it seemed to condense, to gain definition. It was becoming a figure, tall, thin, but not human. Its form was jagged, angular, like broken glass or sharp shadows pieced together. It was made of pure darkness, yet it seemed to absorb the dim light around it. It reached the surface of the reflected water and emerged. It stood there in the reflection, beside my reflection. It turned its head. In the reflection, its face was vague, indistinct, made of shifting shadow. But the eyes were clear. 2 points of absolute blackness. Like voids, they were fixed on me, not on my reflection. On me sitting by the fence, I felt their gaze, cold, penetrating, as if they were looking directly into my mind. My reflection in the water remained still, frozen in a silent scream. But my body, my real body, felt a terrifying disconnect. A strange tingling sensation spread through my limbs. My fingers curled involuntarily. My leg muscles twitched. It was like my body wanted to move on its own, but something was holding it still. A whisper entered my mind, not through my ears, directly in my thoughts. It wasn't words, more like a concept, a feeling, an invitation. Join, mute, come down. It was cold, ancient, utterly alien. Panic seized me. It was raw, primal, overwhelming. My heart was pounding so hard. I felt it rattling my ribs. I scrambled backward, pushing my chair over. It clattered loudly on the concrete. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady. I backed away from the pool's edge, away from the reflection, towards the gate. My hands fumbled with the gate latch. They were shaking violently. Cold sweat was pouring down my face. I could still feel those black eyes on me. That cold mental whisper. I finally got the gate open, slipped through, and slammed it shut behind me. I leaned against the fence, trying to catch my breath, the metal cool against my damp back. I forced myself to look back at the pool area. The water was still again, empty. The reflection was just the trees and the sky. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. Intense, overpowering. It clung to me like a second skin. Back in my apartment, I locked everything, pushed the couch against the door. I felt like a cornered animal. The terror was absolute. I paced the floor, unable to sit or stand still. My mind was a chaotic mess of fear and disbelief. It had been real. I had seen it, and it had seen me. The subsequent nights were a living nightmare. I couldn't go back to the pool. The thought alone made me feel physically ill. But the pool, or whatever was in it, wasn't finished with me. The feeling of being watched became constant, a relentless pressure on my senses. I started seeing reflections out of the corner of my eye everywhere. In windows and polished surfaces, even on my computer screen when it was off. Fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows that seemed to linger too long, and sometimes for a fraction of a second, a pair of impossibly black eyes, staring back. Water became a source of terror. Showering was agony. I'd stand under the spray, heart hammering, convinced that something was just outside the shower curtain, or worse, forming in the water itself. Washing my hands, I'd stare at the swirling water in the sink, expecting to see a dark shape appear. The bathroom mirror, after showering, was the worst. I'd wipe it clear frantically, terrified of seeing that distorted figure behind me, or seeing my own reflection, look back with those empty black eyes. The pull towards the pool intensified. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a deep physical ache, a craving, especially around midnight. My body would tense up, my legs would feel restless, an overwhelming urge to walk back there, to look again. To submit to the terrifying invitation, I had to physically restrain myself some nights, gripping the edge of furniture until my knuckles were white, fighting the unnatural compulsion. I couldn't keep it a secret forever. I tried talking to a friend vaguely, said I was stressed, seeing things, having trouble sleeping. They were sympathetic, suggested a doctor, or maybe I needed a vacation. I knew they didn't believe the half-truths I was telling them. How could they? I sounded crazy. Telling them about a figure in a pool reflection would only confirm it. I felt utterly isolated with my terror. The entity started affecting me more directly. When I was near water, even just a glass on my table, I'd feel a chilling coldness radiating from it. My hands would tremble uncontrollably. I started losing sleep completely. Every time I started to drift off, I'd feel a cold pressure on my chest, hear that faint alien whisper in my mind, and jolt awake, gasping for air, convinced something was looming over my bed. In the darkness of my room, the shadows seemed to writhe. One particularly terrifying night, the pull to the pool was immense. I fought it for hours, pacing my apartment, gripping the walls. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and desperate, I found myself standing by the window that overlooked the pool area. My legs had carried me there without conscious thought. I stared down. The pool was a dark rectangle in the dim light, and in its surface, clear as day, was the figure, standing beside a distorted reflection of myself. It was taller tonight, more solid-looking. Its form seemed to undulate, but its black eyes were fixed upwards towards my window. It raised a hand. In the reflection, not the shadowy appendage I'd seen before. This looked closer to human, but wrong. Fingers too long, jointed unnaturally. And in my apartment, several stories up, I felt a cold touch against my window pane, like long icy fingers pressing against the glass. I stumbled back from the window, crying out. My body was seized with tremors. The air in my apartment felt suddenly freezing. That oppressive silence from the pool area seemed to fill my room. I knew I couldn't live like this. I was trapped in my own apartment, terrified of water, terrified of reflections, constantly fighting a compulsion to return to that awful pool. I had to do something. I remembered throwing the chair, disrupting the surface. It had worked temporarily. Could I do something more permanent? I didn't have access to drain the pool. I couldn't cover it completely, but I could try to break the reflection, to make the surface inhospitable. I thought about what was in the pool area. The lounge chairs, the fence, the concrete, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a desperate resolve. I snuck out of my apartment. My legs were weak, my heart hammering. I reached the pool gate. It was open. Again, I stepped into the pool area. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. The silence was absolute. I could see the pool, black water, still, waiting. My reflection appeared, and beside it the figure, taller now. Reaching out, the whisper filled my mind, louder than ever. Come. It is time. It is time. Ignored it. Forced my trembling legs to move. I went to the side of the pool, to the concrete deck. I looked at the figure in the reflection. It was stepping forward, out of the water, onto the reflected deck. Getting closer to my reflection. My eyes scanned the real deck. The concrete was cracked in places. Rusted rebar poked out near the edges. I needed to break the reflection, to make the surface chaotic. Undistorted, I grabbed a loose piece of rebar from the ground. Heavy, sharp, the figure in the reflection was standing right beside my reflection now. Its shadowy hand was reaching for my reflected hand. Its black eyes fixed on my reflection's face. With a guttural cry, I lifted the rebar, and I started smashing the concrete deck. Hard. Near the edge of the pool. Every blow sent cracks radiating outwards. Dust and chips flew into the air. The sound was deafening in the silence. Smash. 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 In the reflection, the figure recoiled. Its form flickered, wavered. The reflection of the deck I was smashing began to distort wildly. Cracks appeared in the reflected concrete, breaking the image. The whisper in my mind turned into a roar, a soundless shriek of pure rage and pain. The figure lunged, in the reflection, towards the surface, towards the edge. Its form seemed to stretch, to become impossibly long. Trying to cross the boundary, I kept smashing, aiming for the concrete right at the pool's edge, where the reflection met the reality. Smash, smash, smash. My arms ached. My hands were bleeding. But I didn't stop. I had to break it. Break the mirror. Break the connection. With one final, desperate blow, I hit the concrete right at the edge. It cracked deeply. A large chunk broke off, falling into the pool water with a splash. The water rippled violently. The reflection shattered completely. For an instant, in the chaos of the splashing water and cracking concrete, I saw the figure in the reflection convulse. Its form broke apart, fragmenting into countless dark shards that seemed to fall back into the reflected depths. The shriek in my mind cut off abruptly. Silence returned. Real silence this time, not the oppressive, watchful kind. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. The dripping water, the echoes of the smashing. I dropped the rebar. It clattered onto the cracked deck. I stood there trembling, bleeding, utterly exhausted. I looked at the pool. The water was still. The reflection was back. Just the normal reflection of the sky. Empty. I walked back to my apartment. My legs felt like lead. My body ached. I locked the door, didn't push furniture against it this time. I was too tired. I cleaned my bleeding hands. Looked in the bathroom mirror. My reflection was pale, drawn. But it was me. Just me. The feeling of being watched lessened after that night. It didn't vanish entirely. Not ever, but it was weaker. More distant, like the observer had moved further away. I never went near the pool again. They eventually repaired the cracked concrete deck, but I always avoided looking at it. I still see reflections, every day, in windows, in polished surfaces, and sometimes just for a fleeting second. I see something else, a flicker, a shadow that moves too fast, a pair of dark eyes in the corner of the glass, and the fear returns. A cold, sharp jolt. I survived. I think. I broke the reflection. I fought back. But I look at my reflection now. And sometimes, especially when I'm tired, I see a faint darkness in the depths of my eyes. A memory of a cold, empty gaze, and I wonder if breaking the mirror only scattered the pieces, or if when the reflection shattered, a tiny shard of that darkness found its way out and stayed with me. I avoid still water now. I never look into a dark pool at night, because even though I'm safe in my apartment, far from that old building, I sometimes feel it, that deep wrong silence, and I wonder if something is still watching, not just from reflections anymore, but from somewhere inside. Story 2. I work in an old office building downtown. It's nothing special, just a standard brick and glass structure that probably went up sometime in the 1970s. There are 8 floors, plus the lobby. My office is on the 7th. It's a quiet place, mostly filled with small businesses and the kind of people who keep to themselves. The kind of building you forget about the moment you leave it, except for the elevator. There's only one main elevator. It's old, just like the building. The metal doors are scratched and dull. The interior lights hum a little too loudly. It moves slowly, with a low groan that seems to come from deep within the building's bones. Sometimes it rattles between floors, or the floor indicator light flickers. The doors don't always align perfectly with the hallway floor. Little things. Annoying maybe, but normal for an old elevator. You get used to its quirks. It was just a box. A slow, noisy box that took me up and down. But then I started noticing the silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was different. A distinct, heavy hush that settled in the elevator car. The moment the doors closed, the hum of the lights would seem to fade. The groan of the motor would feel muffled. The distant city sounds, the hallway chatter. It wouldn't just be blocked out. It felt cancelled, cut off completely, replaced by this profound, unnatural quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, like being submerged in deep water. My ears would feel strange, a slight pressure, a sense of emptiness. It was unsettling. I noticed it first maybe a couple of months ago, stepping in after a busy day, expecting the usual background noise, and being met with that deep stillness. I'd shake my head. Look around the small elevator car. Empty. Just me. I told myself I was imagining it. Or maybe the elevator car was just remarkably well sealed. Good soundproofing. Yes, that must be it. A surprisingly quiet old box. I'd watch the floor numbers light up. 1, 2, 3, up to 7. The doors would open. The normal sounds of the 7th floor hallway would rush in, and the feeling of silence would vanish, but the feeling persisted. Each time I took the elevator, the silence seemed deeper, more potent. It felt like a physical presence, sharing the small space with me, unseen. Then the real oddities began. Beyond the normal old elevator quirks, one morning, I pressed the button for the 7th floor. The doors closed. That heavy silence descended. The elevator started to move. The display showed lows, then 1, then 2. But as it passed the 3rd floor, the car lurched slightly. Not a normal bump, more like a hiccup. And the floor display, it flickered violently, went blank for a second. Then it showed DAWs, just 3 dots. My stomach tightened. What did that mean? The elevator continued to ascend. Slowly. The silence was absolute. I couldn't even hear the motor groan now, just my own breath, and the pounding of my heart. The display flickered again, and now it showed 9s. My eyes widened. 9. There are only 8 floors. My office is on 7. The building has 8 floors. That's a fact. A simple, solid fact. 9 doesn't exist. The elevator kept going up. 8, the top floor. Then it slowed. Just slightly. The display still showed 9s. The car came to a gentle stop. The doors began to slide open. My blood ran cold. I was looking at a hallway. It looked exactly like the hallways in my building. Same faded carpet, same pale gray paint, Same ceiling tiles, same dim fluorescent lights, but it was empty. Utterly, completely empty. And the silence, it was overwhelming. The silence from inside the elevator car had bled out into the hallway. It felt ancient, heavy, like it had been waiting there for a very long time. I stood frozen in the elevator doorway, my mind struggling to process. Where was I? This wasn't the 9th floor. There was no 9th floor. Was this a maintenance level? A hidden floor? It didn't look like one. It looked like a normal office hallway, but devoid of any sign of life. No office names on doors, no decoration on the walls, just empty space. I reached for the door closest button. My hand was trembling as the doors began to move. I forced myself to look down the hallway. It seemed to stretch further than normal, and at the very end, where the hallway should have turned a corner, I saw something. A flicker of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. Too quick, too smooth. It ducked into a doorway instantly. The doors closed, sealing me back in the car. The silence inside intensified. It felt like a physical weight on my chest. My breath was shallow, my heart was pounding against my ribs. I leaned my head back against the cold metal wall, closed my eyes for a second, tried to steady myself. This was not a glitch. This was wrong. Profoundly wrong. I pressed the button for 7. And L. And 1. Any button. Just get me out of here. The elevator shuddered, began to move down. The display showed 9s for a moment, then 8, then 7. It stopped. The doors opened. I was on the 7th floor. My floor. The hallway was familiar. The office door was there. I could hear the faint click-clack of keyboards from down the hall. The air felt normal, less cold, less heavy. I practically fell out of the elevator, leaned against the hallway wall. Gasping for air, colleague walked by, gave me a strange look, asked if I was okay. I just nodded, mumbled something about feeling dizzy. I didn't take the elevator again that day. Or the next. I took the stairs, all 7 flights up and down. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I felt a strange sense of safety. As long as my feet were on solid ground, following a predictable path. But the experience had lodged itself in my mind. The silence, the impossible floor, the fleeting shadow. It replayed in my thoughts. I found myself constantly thinking about the elevator, watching it from a distance, waiting to see if the display would show 9s for anyone else. It never did. Just normal numbers. The stairs became exhausting. My schedule was getting busier. I had meetings on different floors. The stairs were taking too much time. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. An electrical surge. A bizarre coincidence. Maybe he had been more tired than I thought. Stress. It could do strange things to your perception. People hallucinate, right? Against my better judgment, I decided to take the elevator again. Just to the 6th floor. 1 floor down. Easy. What could happen? I waited in the lobby. The elevator arrived. Doors opened. Empty. I stepped inside. Pressed 6. The doors closed. The silence descended. As profound as before. My heart rate jumped. The elevator started to move. Display showed, then 1. It counted normally, up to 6 on. It stopped. Doors opened. I was on the 6th floor. It looked normal. Same layout as my floor. Office doors, potted plants, motivational posters on the walls, but it was empty. Completely silent. Just like the 9th floor. That deep oppressive silence. It flowed out of the elevator, filling the hallway. My breath hitched. My gaze swept down the hall. Nothing. Empty. But the silence felt watchful. Expectant. The air was colder than it should have been. I stood in the doorway of the elevator, unwilling to step out fully, unwilling to close the doors and leave the perceived safety of the car. Then I heard a sound, very faint, from down the hallway, a soft shuffle, like feet on carpet. I froze, strained my ears. Silence again. Had I imagined it? No. There it was again. A distinct shuffle, closer this time. Approaching. coming from the direction of the corner, where I couldn't see. My hand shot out, hit the door closes button. Repeatedly, frantically, the doors began to slide shut. Slowly, too slowly, the shuffling sound became clearer. Faster, it was coming towards me. As the doors narrowed, I saw something at the end of the hall, standing at the corner, waiting. It was a figure, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing me, and I felt its gaze. Even from that distance, cold, intent. The doors were almost closed. The figure didn't move. It didn't run. It just stood there, watching. And then, as the gap became a sliver, I saw its head tilt, unnaturally, too far to the side, and I felt that terrible silence intensify, like a physical pressure against my skull. The doors sealed shut. I was back in the elevator car, alone, in the absolute silence, my back against the wall, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. The floor display showed 6, I pressed 7s, and talal. And nothing, the buttons didn't light up, didn't respond. The alarm button was dead. I was trapped, again, on a silent floor, with a silent elevator, and something waiting in the hallway. Something that didn't belong. The space inside the elevator car began to feel strange. It seemed larger than before, wider. The corners felt further away. The light flickered violently, threatening to plunge me into darkness. The silence was a roar in my ears. Then I heard it. Not the scratching from before, a low hum, coming from the floor of the car, and it felt wrong, like a vibration that resonated in my bones. The floor display started changing numbers again, randomly, faster and faster. 5, 0, -1, 12. The numbers blurred, unreadable. The car jolted, violently, not up or down, sideways. I cried out, stumbled, fell against the wall. The metal felt cold, vibrating. The silence outside the car seemed to press in. I could feel the weight of it, the sheer wrongness of the space I was in. I pushed myself up, leaned against the wall. My mind was racing, panicked. What was happening? Was the building falling apart? Or was this something else? Was the elevator taking me somewhere? Somewhere impossible. The doors suddenly began to pry open, slowly creaking. I stared. The display still showed random numbers. The low hum from the floor intensified. I was looking into the hallway again, the silent 6th floor, but it looked different, distorted. The walls seemed to ripple, like heat haze. The floor tilted. The motivational posters on the wall were blurred, their words twisting into meaningless shapes. And standing just outside the door, in the distorted hallway, was the figure. It was closer now. Its form was clearer, made of shifting shadow but with undeniable shape. Tall, thin, its head still tilted at that unnatural angle. Those black, void-like eyes fixed on me. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting, expecting me. And behind it, further down the hallway, I saw them, more figures, standing still, lining the hall, their forms also distorted, twisted, silent, watching the elevator, waiting. The hum from the elevator floor grew louder, a deep resonant thrumming. It vibrated through me, made my teeth ache. The figure in the doorway slowly raised a hand, a long, thin appendage of shadow. It reached towards me, towards the elevator car. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in terror. The silence was deafening. The distorted hallway seemed to draw me in. The figures were silent, but I felt their presence, a collective awareness, focused on the elevator, focused on me. I needed to close the doors, had to. My hand fumbled for the button, missed it, hit the wall. The figure's hand was closer, reaching into the car. I felt a sudden intense cold, an absolute zero that radiated from its touch. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I slapped the door closes button with the heel of my hand. Hard, repeatedly. The doors began to slam shut. faster this time, with a loud screeching metal sound that seemed to pierce the silence. The figure in the doorway recoiled, its hands snapped back. The figures down the hall seemed to jolt, like startled birds. The doors slammed shut, with a final echoing clang, cutting off the sight of the distorted hallway and the silent figures. The elevator car jolted violently, not just sideways now, up and down, shuddering. The floor display went wild, flashing random numbers faster than before. The low hum from the floor rose in pitch, became a whine. Painful. I fell to the floor of the elevator car, cowering, covering my head with my arms. The car shook, rattled. The lights flickered wildly, turning the small space into a strobe-lit nightmare. The silence was still there, but it was fighting against the violent sounds of the elevator's death throes. It felt like the elevator itself was screaming, or the space around it was collapsing. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The shaking ceased, the loud whine cut off. The lights returned to a steady, if still dim, hum. The silence returned, but it felt different, less oppressive, like it had been shaken, or pierced. I looked up slowly, trembling. The floor display was back to normal. It showed 7. The doors slid open. I was on the 7th floor. My floor, the hallway, was normal. The lights were steady. I could hear faint office sounds. The air felt real, normal. I scrambled out of the elevator car, stumbled into the hallway. My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, just outside the elevator doors, gasping for breath. My body was shaking uncontrollably. Sweat dripped into my eyes. A colleague rushed over, saw me on the floor, asked what was wrong. I couldn't speak, just pointed a shaking finger at the elevator doors, mumbled something about being stuck. Feeling sick, they helped me up, looked at the elevator, said it seemed fine. I just nodded, couldn't explain, couldn't tell them about the 9th floor, the silent 6th, the distorted hallway, the figures, the scratching, the falling. I went home that day, didn't go back to the office for a week. When I did, I took the stairs, every single day. 14 flights. Without fail, I became known as the guy who was obsessed with fitness. I let them think that it was easier than the truth. I still work in that building, still take the stairs. I watch other people use the elevator, see them step in. The doors close, and I imagine that silence descending, that heavy, wrong quiet. I wonder if they feel it too, if they ever see a number higher than 8, if the doors ever open to somewhere empty, somewhere distorted. I haven't seen the figures again, not clearly, but the experience changed me. Permanently. I'm jumpy, paranoid. I flinch at sudden noises. I hate confined spaces. And the silence, that profound, unnatural silence. I hear it sometimes, when I'm alone, in my apartment. In the middle of the night, it settles in the corners of the room, presses against my ears. I see things too, glitches, in reality, just for a second. Walking down a familiar street, the buildings will seem to warp. A hallway in my apartment will look too long. A reflection in a window pane will hold a distorted image for a fraction of a second longer than possible. Just echoes, remnants. I don't know what that elevator is, or what the silence is, or where those impossible floors are. A different dimension, a pocket of twisted reality, a trap. I just know I escaped it, I think. But sometimes when I'm standing somewhere quiet, and that heavy silence starts to descend, I feel the distinct sensation of being watched. And I wonder if the silence that fills the elevator car, the silence that pressed against me on those impossible floors, is something that clings, something that followed me out, something that is now permanently a part of me. A silent passenger, always there, waiting for reality to glitch again, waiting for the doors to open to somewhere else. Story 3. The old radio sat on my bedside table. It was a vintage model, all polished wood and chrome knobs. I liked listening to it late at night. Most stations faded after dark, but you could sometimes pick up distant signals. Weathered voices from faraway towns, faint music from across state lines. It was a comforting ritual. The static was like white noise. The faint signals a reminder that the world was still out there, even when I was alone in my quiet apartment. My apartment is small, just a few rooms. It's generally quiet after midnight. The building is old. The sounds are familiar. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the distant drone of traffic on the highway. I liked the silence, punctuated by the crackle and murmur of the radio. It was my space, my quiet time. That's when I first heard it. A few weeks ago, I was scanning through the AM dial, just looking for something interesting. Past the local news, past the talk shows, down in the static, between the stations, I hit a frequency that was usually empty. Just his. But this time there was something else. It wasn't clear. Not at first. Just a sound embedded in the static. A pulse. A rhythm. Like a slow, faint heartbeat. Or a drum. Very deep. Very low. It was almost inaudible. I leaned closer to the radio. Tried to tune it perfectly. The sound persisted. A steady, rhythmic pulse buried under the hiss. I thought it was some kind of interference. Maybe from an old appliance, or some weird atmospheric condition, bouncing a signal from far away. I tried changing the radio's position, moved it away from the wall, away from the lamp. The pulse remained steady, unchanging. I listened for a few minutes. It didn't seem to do anything else. No music, no voices, just the pulse and the static. Eventually I shrugged, figured it was just some obscure signal I'd never picked up before. Maybe from a military base, or some kind of beacon. I tuned away, found a clear station playing old jazz. The pulse was gone, replaced by familiar music. I forgot about it. Almost, but the next night, scanning the dial again, I found it. On the exact same frequency, the static and the pulse still there. Steady, rhythmic. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was broadcasting. Something was broadcasting this strange, silent rhythm on an empty frequency. I started listening to it more often. Out of curiosity, the pulse was always there. Always the same frequency. Always the same rhythm. It never changed. Never deviated. I tried looking up unusual radio frequencies online. Scanning forums about strange broadcasts. Number stations. Secret signals. I found plenty of weird stuff, but nothing that mentioned a constant, silent pulse. My rational mind told me it was probably something mundane, some kind of industrial equipment signal, or a scientific instrument. Something boring, something explainable, but the feeling I got when I listened to it was anything but boring or explainable. The silence it created felt similar to the silence in the old elevator sometimes. A deep, wrong stillness around the sound, like the world outside the signal just faded, became less real. My apartment felt quieter, emptier. When I listened to the pulse, then the signal started to change. Subtly, one night along with the pulse, I heard something else. A faint, high-pitched whine. It was almost too high to hear, like feedback, or a tiny machine running. It layered over the pulse, creating a new rhythm. More complex, less natural. My fascination grew, and with it, a sense of unease.
What was this? Who was broadcasting it?
Why? I started listening more frequently, staying up later, waiting for the house to be completely silent, tuning in, the pulse, the whine, always there, always on that frequency. I tried recording it. I found an old audio recorder app on my phone. Put the phone next to the radio speaker. Hit record. I recorded the signal for an hour. Listened back the next day. The recording had static, and the pulse, and the whine, but there was something else in the background. Very faint, like voices, whispering. I couldn't make out words. Just a murmur, a low, continuous stream of sound. It sent a chill down my spine. Whispering. In the signal. It wasn't coming from my apartment. I was sure of that. I was alone, had been alone when I recorded it. The whispering was part of the broadcast, buried deep within the static and the pulse. My rationalizations became harder to maintain. This wasn't industrial equipment. This wasn't a beacon. This was something else, something unnatural, something that contained what sounded like human voices. Whispering. I started feeling a little paranoid. Did the voices know I was listening? Were they talking taut at me? The feeling of being watched that I sometimes got seemed to coincide with listening to the signal. It was like tuning in didn't just bring the sound into my apartment. It brought something else with it, an awareness, a presence. Sleep became difficult. My mind was constantly active, thinking about the signal, trying to decipher the whispering. I'd lie in bed in the dark, and even without the radio on, I sometimes thought I could hear a faint pulse, or a high-pitched whine, or that low murmur of voices. Everywhere, in the walls, in the air, the signal continued to evolve. The whispering became clearer, still not words I could understand. But the cadence was unsettling, like a crowd talking at once, or chanting, in a language that felt wrong, like teeth scraping on stone. Then images started appearing in the signal, not visually, of course. It was audio, but I'd hear a sound and a distinct image would form in my mind, unbidden. A flash, a glimpse, a twisted shape, a dark corridor, a pair of eyes. These flashes were jarring, disturbing. They felt like they were being transmitted directly into my thoughts, using the signal as a carrier wave. I tried to find the source of the signal. I wasn't an expert, but I knew a little about radio transmission. I looked online for DIY direction-finding antennas. I ordered some parts, started trying to build a simple setup. My hands trembled as I worked. The paranoia was intense now. I felt like I was doing something I shouldn't be doing, poking at something best left alone. The signal seemed to react to my attempts. When I was working on the antenna, the whispering would intensify, become louder, more insistent. Sometimes the static would surge, overwhelming the pulse and the whine, creating a painful blast of noise from the radio, as if trying to drive me away. One night, the signal changed dramatically. The pulse and whine faded. The static cleared, and a voice emerged, distinct, clear, but distorted. It wasn't a human voice. Not quite. It was layered. Several pitches speaking at once, deep and high, male and female, all blended together, and it was talking. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was speaking, in that grinding, unnatural language. I couldn't understand the words, but the stone-height ones, unmistakable, commanding, authoritative. And then, woven into the strange language, I heard sounds I did recognize. Sounds from my apartment, the creak of my floorboards, the hum of my refrigerator, my own breathing. It was broadcasting my life, my immediate environment, but mixed with its own alien transmission. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just broadcasting, it was broadcasting from me, or near me, and it was aware, fully aware. I felt a profound sense of violation. This signal, had invaded my space, my life. It was using my own sounds, my own environment, to transmit its disturbing message. And the messages, the image flashes became more frequent, more vivid, more horrifying. Twisted figures, impossible spaces, scenes of dread and despair. I stopped trying to build the antenna. It felt pointless. The source wasn't just out there. It was also in here, or connected to here. I just listened now, paralyzed by fear and a horrifying fascination. The layered voice would speak, describe things in my apartment, describe my actions, my thoughts. It was uncanny, terrifying. It started making predictions, in that alien language punctuated by familiar sounds from my life. Predictions about small things. A lamp flickering and going out later that night. It happened. A specific item falling off a shelf. It fell. Then the predictions got bigger, more personal, about people I knew, small misfortunes, arguments, failures. and unsettlingly they started coming true. The signal was showing me, or telling me, things it shouldn't know. Things that hadn't happened yet. Was it seeing the future? Or was it influencing it? Was listening to the signal somehow making these things happen? Was my act of tuning in, powering it, allowing it to exert its will on reality? The idea was horrifying, that my simple habit of listening to the radio at night had connected me to something that could see into the future, or change it, and it was using my life as its canvas, my reality as its broadcast station. One night, the layered voice spoke directly to me, in my mind, over the signal. "Kurt, you listen. You receive. You are a receiver." The meaning was clear, even without language. It knew I was there. It had chosen me, or I had chosen it. By tuning in, the pressure in my head became intense. A throbbing ache behind my eyes. The image flashes were constant now. A torrent of disturbing visuals. The silence around the signal felt crushing, like the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only me and the broadcast. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to make it stop, had to cut the connection. But how? The radio was just a tool. The signal was the problem, the source. But if the source was also my life, or something connected to me, I decided I had to try and break the radio. The physical link, maybe destroying the receiver would stop the transmission. At least for me, it felt like a futile act, but it was the only thing I could think of. It was late. The signal was active. The layered voice was speaking, describing the items on my desk. My racing pulse, I grabbed the old radio. It felt strangely heavy, colder than it should be. The wood seemed to hum with its own energy. I carried it into the living room, set it on the floor. The layered voice from the speaker intensified. It sounded angry now, panicked. The image flashes in my mind became violent. Explosions, collapsing buildings, twisted bodies, as if the signal was showing me what would happen if I interfered. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Sweat dripped into my eyes. The layered voice from the radio was a cacophony now, all the pitches screaming at once. The whispering voices from before joined in, 1,000 tiny whispers swirling into a single terrifying roar. I raised the hammer, looked at the radio. The speaker was glowing faintly, with a strange internal light. The layered voice shrieked in my mind. "No, receive." Fied swung the hammer down. Hard, the metal grill on the speaker shattered. Glass from the vacuum tubes inside imploded. Sparks flew. There was a loud, high-pitched keening sound from the radio. Not from the speaker, but from within the breaking components. It was a sound of pain, or rage, or both. I hit it again, and again, smashing the wood casing, ripping out wires. The radio crackled and shrieked. The signal seemed to be fighting back, trying to overload my senses. The image flashes in my mind were blinding. White light mixed with horrifying scenes. I kept hitting it until the radio was nothing but splinters, broken metal, and shattered glass. A destroyed mess on my living room floor. When I stopped, panting, covered in sweat and debris, the silence returned. Not the oppressive silence of the signal. Real silence. Just my own ragged breathing. The sound of my heart pounding. The signal was gone. The layered voice was gone. The whispering was gone. The pulse and whine were gone. The image flashes stopped. I stood there for a long time, leaning on the hammer, staring at the destroyed radio. It was over. I had done it. I had cut the connection. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up the mess. My body ached, my mind felt numb. But I felt relief, a profound, overwhelming relief. It was gone. The signal was gone. The next few days were quiet, blissfully quiet. I didn't turn on any radios, didn't go looking for the signal. I felt lighter, calmer. I slept better than I had in weeks. I started to think it was truly over, that destroying the radio had worked. But the relief didn't last. The signal was gone, but the silence, that specific unnatural silence, it reappeared sometimes, When I was in a quiet room, or walking alone at night, that pressure in my ears, that sense of emptiness, it was fainter than before, more fleeting, but it was there, a ghost of the signal and the sounds. I started hearing things again, not the layered voice, not the distinct whispers, but low sounds, random, unexplained, a faint click that seemed to come from nowhere, a low hum that didn't match any appliance, a brief burst of static in the air itself, just for a second, then gone, and the image flashes. They still happen, less frequently now, less violent. But sometimes when my mind is quiet, I'll get a sudden jarring image, a distorted face, a strange symbol, a glimpse of a dark, impossible space, remnants of the broadcast, still stored somewhere, in my memory, or deeper. I don't listen to radios anymore. Any kind of radio, the static makes my skin crawl, certain frequencies make my teeth ache. I avoid empty channels, I cut the connection. I stopped being a receiver, but I worry, sometimes, late at night, when the silence settles in, and I hear a faint, unexplainable sound. I worry that destroying the radio didn't just stop the broadcast from coming in. Maybe it also stopped something from getting out. And I wonder if the signal isn't just something out there broadcasting, maybe it's something that tries to get inside, something that uses people as receivers. And if I wasn't just receiving the signal anymore, if, in those final terrifying moments, something from the signal transferred, and now a part of that alien broadcast is inside me, waiting, listening, and sometimes transmitting from the quietest, darkest corners of my own mind. Story 4. Buying the house was supposed to be a fresh start. It wasn't a grand place, but it had potential. Enough rooms, a solid structure, and a quiet street. The best part, or so I thought, was the garden. It was large, stretching out behind the house, mostly hidden from the street by tall old trees. It hadn't been tended in years. It was a wilderness, a tangle of weeds, overgrown bushes, and ancient, gnarled trees. When I first saw it, I felt a sense of excitement. It was a project, a canvas. I envisioned spending weekends out there, clearing the brush, planting flowers, maybe even putting in a small vegetable patch, bringing it back to life. There was one part of the garden, though, that was particularly dense. At the very back, near the old stone wall that marked the property line, a thicket of something dark and thorny. It looked almost impenetrable. Even from a distance it felt heavier, more shadowed. I figured I'd tackle that part last. A challenge for another day. I started with the areas closer to the house, armed with gloves, shears, and a weed whacker. I began the long process of reclaiming the space. It was hard work. The weeds were tough, the roots were deep, but it was satisfying. Clearing away the old growth felt like peeling back layers of time. As I worked, I started to notice little things. Minor annoyances mostly. The weeds I pulled up seemed to grow back with impossible speed. I'd clear a patch one day, and by the next morning there would be new shoots already pushing through the soil. It was frustrating, but I chalked it up to fertile ground, and perhaps my own inexperience as a gardener. I also started hearing sounds, faint sounds, when I was working alone in the quiet of the afternoon, a rustling in the dense thicket at the back, even when there was no wind, a soft scraping sound, like branches rubbing together, but it seemed too regular, too deliberate. I'd pause my work, listen, but the sounds would stop the moment I was still. I blamed it on birds or squirrels hiding in the undergrowth. Wildlife adjusting to my presence, but the sounds persisted, and they started to feel closer, less like random animal movements, more like deliberate actions. That soft scraping, that dry rustling that sounded sometimes like whispering leaves. I'd be working near the back of the garden, and the sounds would seem to come from just behind me. I'd whip around, clippers in hand, expecting to see something, anything. but there was never anything there. Just the silent, watchful tangle of the garden. The plants themselves started to feel different, more aggressive. The thorns on the bushes seemed sharper than they should be. The vines felt unnervingly strong, almost like they were trying to trip me. As I walked through them, clearing the dense patches became a battle. It wasn't just cutting away growth. It felt like fighting against a deliberate resistance. The dense thicket at the back was the worst. Just being near it gave me an uneasy feeling, a sense of being watched, not by eyes but by something formless, ancient. The air around it felt colder, heavier. The plants there were unlike anything else in the garden. Darker leaves, thicker, almost leathery vines, and the thorns, they were like needles, long and black. I decided I needed to tackle the thicket, to clear it back, to let light in. Maybe that would stop the strange feelings, stop the sounds. I bought stronger gloves, a small saw. I approached the thicket with a sense of grim determination. Cutting into it was incredibly difficult. The vines were like wire. The branches seemed to twist away from my saw blade. The thorns snagged at everything. My clothes, my gloves, my skin. I felt a prickling sensation all over my body. A strange itch that wouldn't go away. As I worked, the sounds from within the thicket intensified. That dry rustling became clearer. It didn't sound like whispering now. Low, multi-tonal whispers, just beyond the edge of intelligibility. And that scraping sound, it was like something large was dragging itself through the undergrowth, moving just out of sight. I started feeling actively unwelcome, resisted. It was more than just tough plants. It felt personal, as if the garden itself was pushing back, trying to keep me out of that deep, dark place at the back. The plants seemed to vibrate faintly when I touched them. The air grew heavy with a strange, earthy smell, not like healthy soil, more like decay, wet, dark earth, and something else, something sharp, unpleasant. Despite the resistance, I managed to cut away some of the outer layer of the thicket to create a small opening. What I saw inside didn't make sense. It was darker than it should have been. The light didn't seem to penetrate. The plants were impossibly tangled, forming shapes that looked wrong, like woven cages or distorted limbs, and there was a sound coming from the heart of it. A low, rhythmic pulsing, like a slow heartbeat, but deep, too deep. It resonated in my chest when I got closer. I started having nightmares, dreams about being lost in a maze of thorns and vines. The plants would move, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I could hear the whispering all around me, and that slow, deep pulse. In the dreams, the plants felt like living flesh, warm and strangely sticky. I'd wake up tangled in my sheets, heart pounding, covered in a cold sweat, feeling an intense itching all over my skin. The itching persisted into the day. My skin felt sensitive, raw. Sometimes I'd look at my arms and legs and think I saw faint lines under the skin, like something was growing just beneath the surface. It was probably just irritation from the thorns. I told myself, just my imagination feeding off the bad dreams. The garden wasn't just resisting me anymore. It felt like it was actively watching me, studying me. The branches of the trees seemed to lean in. The bushes seemed to shift position when I wasn't looking. The thicket at the back felt like a solid wall of eyes, all focused on me. I started seeing fleeting glimpses of movement within the thicket during the day. Shapes, darker than the shadows, moving slowly, like something large was stirring inside. But when I looked directly, they were gone. Just the static tangle of branches. I tried herbicides, strong ones, sprayed them liberally on the edge of the thicket. The plants didn't die. They seemed to recoil for a moment, their leaves curling, and then they'd stretch back out, reaching towards the spray, darker and somehow stronger than before. It felt like I wasn't killing them. I was feeding them, provoking them. The sounds from the thicket became more aggressive. That scraping was louder, faster, the whispering. Sometimes I thought I could almost hear words, twisted, guttural sounds that hurt my mind more than my ears. And the pulsing heart, It was stronger now. Faster, almost frantic. I became obsessed. Terrified, but unable to stay away. I had to know what was in there. What was causing all this? That dark, impenetrable heart of the garden. The call from within it was growing louder, more insistent. Not a sound I heard, but a feeling. A pull, drawing me in. One evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows, I went back to the edge of the thicket. The air was thick with that strange decay smell. The whispering was loud now, swirling around me. The pulsing from the depths of the thicket was a heavy thrumming in my chest. I felt a strange calm settle over me, overriding the fear, a sense of inevitability. I pushed my way through the opening I had made. The thorns tore at my clothes, my skin, but I barely felt it. The itching was intense now, a fire spreading across my body. Inside the thicket, it was almost completely dark. Even though it wasn't fully night yet, the canopy of twisted branches blocked out most of the light. The air was damp, warm and heavy with that strange smell. The plants here were different. They didn't look like normal garden plants. The vines were thick as ropes, black and shiny. The leaves were large, dark, and felt strangely smooth, almost like skin. The thorns were everywhere, long and sharp, coated in a dark, viscous sap. The scraping sound was loud in here. It was coming from the ground, as if something was dragging itself along beneath the tangled roots. And the whispering, it was all around me. Coming from the leaves, the branches, the air itself. It sounded like countless voices, overlapping, speaking in that guttural, mind-bending language. I pushed deeper, following the sound of the pulsing heart. The growth became even more dense. The vines formed a canopy above, blocking out the sky. The ground was soft, spongy, covered in a thick layer of decaying matter that seemed to squirm faintly under my feet. I reached the center. It wasn't a clearing, it was a space, enclosed by the thickest, darkest vines. In the middle was something that looked like a mound of dark earth and tangled roots. But it was pulsing, expanding and contracting slowly, in time with the deep thrumming sound. It was warm, living, and growing out of the center of the mound was something else. Not a plant, not a tree, a structure made of the same dark, leathery vines, but woven into unnatural shapes. Spirals, angles that shouldn't exist. It looked like a piece of impossible architecture, being grown from the earth, and from this structure came the strongest pulsing, the loudest whispering. I saw movement then, within the structure, shapes forming in the woven vines, not distinct, but suggested. Limbs, a torso, a head. The shape was large, coiled within the structure, breathing. A whisper detached itself from the chorus, clearer, colder. It was in my mind. You came, you sought, you found. My blood ran cold. This thing, the garden, it was aware. It had been waiting. It had been calling me. The itching on my skin became unbearable. I looked down. In the dim light filtering through the dense growth, I saw that the faint lines I'd noticed earlier were darker now, more prominent, spreading across my skin, like tiny vines growing under my flesh. The pulsing mound in the center seemed to swell. The woven structure above it shifted. An opening formed, and a shape began to emerge. Slow, deliberate, made of the same dark living vines. It was large, tentacled. Its form vaguely suggested a body. And from its center, where a head might be, were those black void-like eyes I had seen in the reflection of the pool. But larger, older, infinitely cold. The air filled with that pungent decay smell, overpowering now. The itching on my skin was a burning torment. I felt a pull, a physical force, drawing me towards the pulsing mound, towards the emerging entity. Join us. Become one. Feed the growth. The whisper filled my mind. A promise. A threat. Panic erupted. Absolute, pure terror. This wasn't just a garden. It was something ancient. something malevolent, and it was trying to absorb me, to make me part of its grotesque growth. I stumbled backward, trying to push my way through the tangled vines. They seemed to resist me, holding me back. The thorns tore at my skin, drawing blood that felt strangely sticky, strangely thick. The itching was maddening. I could feel those lines under my skin spreading, deepening. The entity was emerging further from the mound, its tentacled limbs reaching out. The whispering chorus from the plants intensified. It felt like they were chanting, urging it on. I had to get out, had to break free. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in scratches and sap. The lines under the skin were clearest there, like a dark network spreading. In a desperate frenzy, I grabbed a sharp piece of broken branch from the ground. Ignoring the pain, I started hacking at the thickest vines blocking my escape. Cutting, sawing, tearing. The vines bled a dark, viscous sap that smelled sickeningly sweet. They felt unnervingly fleshy beneath my touch. The entity shrieked in my mind, a soundless blast of pure agony and rage. It lashed out with a tentacle made of vines. It struck the ground near me, crushing the undergrowth. The ground pulsed violently. I hacked faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispering was a roar now, screaming in that alien language. The itching was a fire. I felt like my skin was splitting open, letting the dark growth inside. I finally severed a thick vine. It snapped back, hissing, spraying sap. It created a gap, a path. Without thinking, I scrambled through it, tearing myself free from the thorns, leaving pieces of my clothing, perhaps pieces of my skin, behind. I burst out of the thicket, into the fading light of the garden. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I ran, across the grass, tripping over roots, towards the house. The sounds of the thicket faded behind me. The pulsing, the whispering, the scraping, they grew more distant, less intense. I reached the back door, fumbled with the lock, threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, leaned against it, panting, trembling, covered in sweat, sap, and blood. I was out. I had escaped. I stood there for a long time, listening. The house was silent. The sounds of the garden were gone, just the normal night sounds of the street filtering in. I pushed myself away from the door, walked to the sink, washed the sap and blood from my hands. The itching was still there, a dull ache now. The lines under my skin, they were still visible, maybe fainter, or maybe just less noticeable, in the house light. I didn't go back into the garden after that night. Not ever. I boarded up the back door, put heavy curtains on the windows facing the back. I avoided looking outside, but I still live here, in the house, and the garden is still out there. Waiting, I still hear sounds sometimes. Very faint. From the back of the house, a soft rustling, a low pulse, especially at night, and the smell, that strange, earthy decay smell. I catch faint whiffs of it, even inside the house, and the itching, it comes and goes. The lines under my skin, they seem to fade, but then reappear. Sometimes I look at my hands, and I think I see them clearly, dark lines, spreading like roots, or vines. I survived. I escaped the thicket, but I wonder, when I was fighting my way out, tearing myself free from the thorns and vines, did something get in? Did a piece of that dark, growing thing attach itself to me? Or worse, did it already find a way in? Through the scratches, through the air, I breathed in that dark place. The garden is silent now, or appears to be, but I know what's in there, and I know it tried to take me, tried to make me part of its growth, and I worry, every day, when I feel that faint itching, when I catch that strange smell, when I think I see a line spreading on my skin. I worry that it's still there, inside me, growing, waiting for its time, waiting for the call from the garden depths, to pull me under, from the inside out. Story 5. I spend a lot of time online, maybe too much. It's part of my work, part of my life. I'm used to navigating the digital landscape, the endless scroll of social media, the deep dives into research papers, the quiet corners of niche forums. I thought I'd seen most of what the internet had to offer. The weird, the mundane, the occasionally disturbing. I was wrong. It started late one night. I was doing some research, clicking through old archives, following a thread of forgotten information. I clicked a link. It looked like it should lead to a standard archived page. Instead, it took me somewhere else entirely. The page that loaded was wrong. It was old, clearly, like something from the very early days of the internet, but not in a nostalgic way. The design was chaotic. Garish colors clashed with a black background. The layout was broken. Text overlapped images. Images were distorted, pixelated messes that were hard to make out. The URL was a string of random characters. There was no clear domain name, just an address that led here. The content was even stranger. Blocks of text that seemed nonsensical. A mix of random words, numbers and symbols that weren't part of any language I recognized. Images that looked like distorted photographs of something organic, but unnatural, like close-ups of strange textures, or impossible biology. And the whole thing loaded slowly with a persistent, low hum coming from my computer that felt like a physical vibration. My first reaction was mild curiosity. Just a weird abandoned site, a relic of some forgotten corner of the web. Maybe someone's old art project, or just a broken link leading to corrupted data. I tried hitting the back button on my browser. Nothing happened. The page stayed there, frozen. I tried closing the tab. It wouldn't close. I tried closing the entire browser window. It minimized, but the icon in my taskbar remained, glowing faintly, and when I hovered over it, the strange page was still visible in the preview. It was stuck. Okay, this was a little unusual, a stubborn pop-up, some weird script. I opened my task manager, looked for processes. Nothing obvious seemed out of place. I tried to end the browser task from there. It gave me an error message, something generic about the task not responding. But the browser window wasn't frozen. I could still scroll the strange page. The distorted images would shift slightly, as I did. A flicker of unease started in my gut. This wasn't normal. I tried restarting my computer. A hard restart, held down the power button until the screen went black. Relief washed over me. Problem solved. Just a weird digital glitch. When my computer booted back up, I opened my browser again, and there it was. The strange website, already loaded, on my homepage, which I hadn't set it as. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a glitch. This was persistent. I spent the next day trying to figure it out. I ran antivirus scans. Nothing. I checked my system files. Nothing unusual. I tried accessing the site from my laptop. It loaded perfectly fine there. Looked exactly the same. Broken, distorted, full of nonsense. It wasn't just my main computer. The site itself was like that, and it seemed to follow my browser activity somehow. The more I looked at the site, the more unsettling it became. The text that seemed like random characters. I started noticing patterns, repetition, certain symbols reappearing. The distorted images, staring at them for long periods, gave me a headache. They felt like they were designed to make my eyes hurt, to confuse me, and the content wasn't static. Each time I refreshed the page, small things would change. A block of text would shift position. An image would be slightly different. The random characters in the text would rearrange themselves. It was like the site was alive and restless. I started feeling a strange compulsion to revisit the site, to stare at it, to try and understand it. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also fascinating. Like a puzzle I couldn't solve, a mystery buried in the code. My sleep started to suffer. I'd lie in bed, mind racing, picturing the distorted images, the weird symbols. I'd close my eyes and see blocks of nonsensical text floating in the darkness. I felt a constant, low-grade anxiety. The feeling of being watched, I sometimes felt stronger now, and I felt like the watching was coming from the screen, from the internet itself. I tried to document the site, to save the pages, to take screenshots, but it was difficult. Saving the page often resulted in corrupted files. Screenshots. Sometimes when I looked at the screenshot later, I'd swear it contained things that weren't on the screen when I took it. A new symbol in the corner. A subtle shift in an image. It was like the site was actively resisting documentation, or infecting it. Then the site's content became dynamic in a more disturbing way. One night I was looking at a particular image, a close-up of something that looked like tangled wires mixed with organic tissue. As I watched, the image seemed to shift. The wires moved. The tissue pulsed faintly. It wasn't a video file. It was a static image, but it was moving. Breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was impossible. I backed away from my screen. My hands were trembling. The hum from my computer felt louder, more insistent. The text on the page started changing more rapidly then, rearranging itself in real time. The random characters would flow and coalesce into recognizable words. But the words made no sense. They formed cryptic messages, warnings, commands. Lookut, GAS, GAS. Flesh. It was communicating, or trying to, using the site as its voice, using the random characters as its alphabet. The feeling of being watched intensified. It felt like something was peering out of the screen, through the pixels, directly at me. The site started affecting my other devices. My phone screen would briefly flash with the same distorted images from the site. My smart TV would randomly display blocks of the nonsensical text. My smart speaker would sometimes emit a low guttural sound that resembled the humming from my computer. When the site was open, it was spreading, its influence leaking out of the browser, into my network, into my home. I became obsessed with finding the source. Where did this site live? Who created it? Was it a person? Or something else? I dove into the technical side, looked at the site's code. It was a mess, layered with obfuscated scripts. But beneath the surface I found fragments that made no sense. Code that seemed to describe biological processes, growth, decay, interspersed with programming commands. I tried to trace the IP address. The results were always confusing. The signal seemed to bounce between dozens of servers globally in milliseconds, leaving no stable trace. It was like the site didn't exist in one place. It existed everywhere, or nowhere, just on the network. The site's content became deeply personal. Disturbingly so, it would display images of my apartment. Not photographs I had taken, but images from angles I'd never captured, showing details of my rooms. Sometimes it would display text that seemed to be a commentary on my current actions. He walks to the window S. He feels fierce. He reaches for the mouse. It was watching me, and broadcasting what it saw. On its broken, abandoned page. One night the website loaded, and the main page was different. It was just a single large image. A photograph. It was a picture of me, sitting at my computer, taken from across the room. I hadn't taken it. Nobody else was in my apartment. My blood ran cold. The picture was recent. I could tell by my clothes. My expression in the photo was one of utter terror. My eyes were wide. My mouth was open in a silent scream. Below the picture was a single line of text. Clear, in plain English. We see you as. The feeling of being watched was unbearable then. It felt like a physical weight on my chest. Like a million invisible eyes were fixed on me, staring out of the screen. Staring from every device in my home. The screen began to flicker violently. The image of myself contorted. My reflected face in the dark screen seemed to stretch, to twist into a horrifying mask of agony. The hum from my computer rose in pitch, becoming a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The silence around the noise felt immense, suffocating. The text on the screen changed again. Join us. Enter the stream. Become data. The monitor screen rippled like water. The image of my distorted face seemed to swim in it. A hand emerged from the screen, from within the image of my own reflection. It was made of flickering pixels and static, long, thin, reaching out of the screen towards me. Terror seized me. Absolute, paralyzing terror. The boundary was breaking. The digital world was bleeding into the real, and something from the other side was trying to pull me in. My body felt rigid, frozen. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. The static hand reached further, closer. I could feel a strange electric coldness emanating from it. The room around me seemed to dim, the edges of my vision blurring. The only clear thing was the screen, the distorted image of my face, the reaching hand, the black eyes staring out of the screen. No, I couldn't let it. I couldn't let it pull me in, turn me into data, trap me in that broken, horrifying space. My mind raced. What did it want? To consume, to replace, to expand. What was its weakness? It lived on the network, in the signal, in the data. It lived in data. It was at data. Could I fight it with data? Overwhelm it? Corrupt it? It was a desperate, probably insane thought, but it was the only one I had. My fingers, still trembling, flew across the keyboard. I opened multiple browser windows, dozens, hundreds, all loading complex, heavy websites, streaming videos, opening large files, anything to flood my network, to create chaos, to bury the signal. The screen flickered more wildly. The reaching hand recoiled slightly. The text on the website changed to rapid-fire symbols. The layered humming from my computer became a frantic, high-pitched screech. The image of my distorted face warped and twisted. I didn't stop. I kept opening windows, downloading files, flooding the connection. My computer fans whirred loudly. The tower vibrated. The air in the room felt thick with static electricity. The figure on the screen seemed to struggle against the digital noise. Its form became less distinct, more transparent. The reaching hand wavered. The black eyes flickered. The text on the website dissolved back into meaningless random characters. The hum from my computer peaked, a single piercing tone. Then with a final loud crackling sound that seemed to come from the speaker itself, my computer screen went black. Utterly black. The hum died. The silence returned. Not the heavy, watchful silence. Just quiet. My hands fell from the keyboard. I was breathing heavily, trembling. My apartment was dark, save for the faint light from the street outside. My computer was off. Silent. I sat there for a long time. In the darkness, listening. Nothing. No hum. No whispers. No strange sounds. Just the familiar silence of my apartment. Slowly, cautiously, I reached out and pressed the power button on my computer. It whirred to life. The screen displayed the normal boot sequence. My standard desktop loaded. My browser wasn't open. I opened it manually. My homepage loaded correctly. I typed in the URL of a major news site. It loaded normally. Fast. Clean. I tried to find the abandoned website again. I typed in the strange URL I had memorized. Nothing. Page not found. I searched online for keywords. I remembered from the site. Nothing. It was gone. It had vanished. I survived. I think I fought back with its own medium. I flooded the stream. I buried it in data. Maybe I corrupted it. Or maybe I just drove it away. For now. But the experience left its mark. Permanently. I'm still online. Still work on my computer. But it feels different now. The screen feels different. Sometimes, when a page loads slowly, or a video buffers, I feel a flicker of panic. My heart rate jumps. I worry the site is trying to reappear. I see glitches now, everywhere, not just on screens. A brief distortion in my vision. A moment where a familiar object looks wrong. A sudden sense of déjà vu that feels too specific, too disturbing. I question what's real, what's just a glitch in my own perception, and the reflection in my screen. When it's off, I used to just see myself. Now, sometimes, just for a second, before my reflection fully forms, I see a swirl of dark pixels, a hint of a shape, and I feel that cold, digital gaze on me. The site is gone, but I worry that a part of it, or a part of what was in it, didn't just disappear. Maybe it embedded itself, not in the network, not just in the computers, but in the person who looked at it too long, who listened too closely, Who felt its touch? I worry that the echo of that abandoned website is now bouncing around inside my own head, waiting for a moment of weakness, waiting to load again, from within. Story 6, Finding It Was Unexpected. My grandmother passed away last fall, and dealing with her house was a slow, painful process. So much history packed into one small space. Boxes and boxes of things. Memories, some good, some less clear. I was up in the attic sorting through old trunks. Dusty, filled with the smell of mothballs and aged paper, and there it was, tucked away in a corner, under a pile of old blankets. My old toy. It was a stuffed animal. A rabbit, I think. Or maybe a bear. It was hard to tell anymore. It was gray, once white, faded and stained with age. One button eye was missing, leaving a dark, empty socket. The other button eye stared straight ahead, slightly crooked. Its synthetic fur was matted and worn thin in places. One ear was floppy, nearly detached. It looked well-loved. Or perhaps just very old and tired. Seeing it brought back a flood of fuzzy memories. Playing in Grandma's living room. Sunny afternoons. A sense of warmth and safety. But mixed with that were other feelings. A faint unease. A sense of something hidden. I couldn't place it. Just that feeling you get when you almost remember something important, but it stays just out of reach. I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. The fur felt strangely soft despite its matted appearance. The remaining button eye seemed to glint in the dusty attic light. I held it for a moment. Childhood comfort. Lingering unease. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to just discard it. It was a piece of my childhood, however vague the memories. I took it home with me. Brought it back to my apartment. I didn't have a specific place for it. I just set it on a shelf in my living room, propped up against a stack of books. The single button eye seemed to look out into the room. For the first few days it was just there. An old, worn-out toy on a shelf. A silent, dusty reminder of the past. I barely noticed it. My apartment is small, quiet. I live alone. It's a peaceful space. Or it was. Then I started noticing little things. Minor things. Easily dismissed. I'd leave the apartment in the morning. Go to work, come back in the evening. And sometimes, the toy seemed different. Not drastically. Just slightly. If I'd left it propped against the books, I might find it tilted slightly. Or turned a different way. Not facing straight out into the room anymore. Maybe angled towards the window. Or towards the door. I'd pause. Look at it. Did I leave it like that? My memory isn't perfect. Maybe I just didn't remember. Maybe I nudged it when putting something on the shelf. I'd straighten it, make sure it was propped up firmly, and dismiss it, but it kept happening. Almost every day, the toy would be in a slightly different position than I remembered. Leaving it, turned towards a different part of the room, or sometimes, if I'd placed it sitting down, I'd find it leaning against the books instead. Small shifts. Nothing dramatic enough to be undeniably supernatural. Just enough to be unsettling, to plant a seed of doubt. I started feeling that faint unease from the attic again. That sense of something hidden. I'd be sitting in my living room, reading or watching TV, and I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck. The distinct, unsettling feeling of being watched. I'd glance up, and my eyes would invariably land on the toy. Its single button eye seemed to be fixed on me, staring. It sounds ridiculous. It's a stuffed animal. It can't stare us. But it felt like it was, intently. I'd look away, try to focus on my book, but the feeling would linger. I'd feel my heart rate pick up. A tightness in my chest. I started having strange dreams. Not outright nightmares. Not at first. Just odd, disjointed dreams that seemed to take place in Grandma's old house. But the house would be subtly wrong. Darker, more silent, and the toy would be there. Always in the background, sometimes on a chair, sometimes on the floor, just watching, never moving, but its presence in the dream felt heavy, significant, unsettling. The sound started around the same time, very faint. At night, when the apartment was completely silent, A soft sound, like old fabric rubbing together, or a quiet sigh. It seemed to come from the living room, from the direction of the shelf. I'd lie in bed, listening, convinced I was imagining it. The sounds of an old building settling, the wind outside, but they sounded closer, and they felt related to the toy. I decided the toy was the source of my unease. It was triggering strange memories, making me paranoid. It had to go. I couldn't just throw it in the trash. That felt wrong, like discarding something that had been important. Even if the memories were fuzzy, I decided to put it away, out of sight, maybe in a box in the back of my closet. That night I took the toy from the shelf. Its synthetic fur felt cold under my hand. The single button eye seemed particularly dark. I carried it to my bedroom closet, found an empty box, placed the toy inside, closed the lid, put the box on the top shelf, behind some old clothes, out of sight, out of mind. I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifted. Finally I went to bed, expecting to sleep soundly for the first time in a while. I woke up around 3 a.m. Instantly, fully awake. My heart was hammering in my chest. The apartment was silent, dark, but I felt a presence, a coldness in the air. I sat up in bed, listening, and I heard it, the soft sound of fabric rubbing, coming from inside my bedroom. Not from the closet, it sounded closer. My eyes scanned the darkness of the room. Shapes were indistinct, shadows played tricks, but then I saw it, standing at the foot of my bed, a darker shape against the gloom. The toy, it was standing there, upright, in the middle of the floor, at the foot of my bed. How? I had put it in the box, in the closet, on the top shelf. It was impossible, absolutely impossible. My mind reeled, terror seized me. This wasn't just imagination. This wasn't stress. The toy was here. It had moved. It had gotten out of the box, out of the closet, and it was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. Its single button eye seemed to catch the faint light from the window. A dark glint. I couldn't see its face clearly in the darkness, but I felt its gaze, intense, malevolent. The air around it felt heavy, cold. I couldn't move. My body was frozen. My throat was tight. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Just a silent gasp. The toy didn't move. It just stood there, watching. The silence in the room was broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. After what felt like an eternity, the feeling of intense presence began to recede slightly. The coldness lessened. The toy's shape seemed to blur back into the shadows. I blinked hard. When I opened my eyes again, it was gone. The space at the foot of my bed was empty. I stayed awake the rest of the night, huddled under my blankets, shaking, staring into the darkness, convinced it was still in the room, hiding, waiting. From that night on, the small shifts became overt movements. I would find the toy in different rooms, on different pieces of furniture, often facing where I was expected to be. If I left it on the kitchen counter, I might find it sitting on my pillow when I went to bed. If I put it back in the closet, I'd find it sitting on the living room couch the next morning. It was playing games, taunting me, letting me know it could be anywhere. The sounds intensified too. That soft rubbing sound, that sigh, they became more frequent. Sometimes I'd hear a distinct thud from another room, like the toy had just jumped off a surface, and the whispering. I started hearing it more clearly, not just a rustle, actual whispers, faint, multitonal, coming from the toy, or from near it. Still not discernible words, but undeniably voices. The nightmares became horrifying, vivid, disturbing. They weren't just about Grandma's house anymore. They were distorted memories, twisted versions of childhood events, and the toy was always there, not just watching. It was active, moving with uncanny speed, its single eye gleaming. Sometimes in the dreams, the toy would grow larger. Its fur would feel like tangled hair. Its missing eye socket would be a dark, gaping void that seemed to pull me in. In the nightmares, the toy would whisper to me, and the whispers contained secrets, things I didn't remember. or things I had forgotten, or things I thought I had kept hidden. Dark secrets about my family, about Grandma's house, and about the toy itself. The dreams were so real, so visceral that I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the whispered secrets echoing in my mind, leaving me with a cold dread that lingered long after I woke up. The toy seemed to know my past, my fears. It was using them against me. The whispered secrets in the dreams would surface in my waking thoughts. Doubts, fears, unsettling questions about my own history. It was like the toy was poisoning my memories, or revealing a hidden terrible truth about them. I tried talking about it again, to another friend. I didn't mention the toy specifically at first, just said I was having terrible nightmares, feeling paranoid, seeing things. They were concerned, suggested therapy, stress they said, lack of sleep, trauma from dealing with the house. They meant well, but they didn't understand. How could they? One day I came home from work, and the toy was sitting on my kitchen table, right in the middle, and arranged around it, using my pens and silverware, were symbols, strange symbols, angular, twisted. They weren't letters. They looked like something ancient, or alien. My blood ran cold. The toy had done this. It was communicating. Actively. I felt an overwhelming surge of terror and anger. This thing was not just moving. It was intelligent, malicious, and it was invading my life, using my things, turning my home into a stage for its terrifying games. I grabbed the toy. Its fur felt unnaturally cold and stiff. The single button eye seemed to pulsate faintly. I felt a surge of dark energy coming from it. The whispers around me intensified, swirling in the air, a chorus of frantic, angry sounds. I carried the toy to the bathroom. The sink. My hands were shaking. I turned on the faucet. Cold water splashed into the sink. I stared at the toy. The single eye seemed to glare at me, daring me. I dunked the toy under the running water. The whispers from it became a shriek, a sound that was both high-pitched and guttural. The water in the sink seemed to recoil, swirling violently. The toy's fur felt suddenly hot, like it was burning, even under the cold water. I felt a jolt go up my arm, like an electric shock. I dropped the toy into the sink. It lay there, half submerged, dripping. The water seemed to steam slightly around it. The whispers subsided, replaced by a low, angry hiss from the toy. Its single eye seemed to glow with a faint red light. Washing it hadn't worked. Water seemed to repel it, but it didn't stop it. It just made it angry. That night, the nightmares were the worst yet. They weren't just fragmented memories. They were vivid, terrifying scenes. Me as a child, alone in Grandma's house, the toy present, not as a comforting plaything, but as something watchful, something that guided me towards dark corners. That whispered secrets in my ear, secrets about things that happened, things I had suppressed, things I had forgotten, terrible things. The toy wasn't just revealing secrets, it was part of them, an observer, an influencer, or worse, a participant. I woke up screaming, covered in sweat, the secrets from the dream echoing in my mind, horrifying truths I couldn't deny. The toy wasn't just haunted, it was a repository of darkness, a link to a terrible past, a past I didn't fully remember. I couldn't live with it anymore. The fear, the nightmares, the way it poisoned my past and invaded my present. I had to destroy it, permanently. I spent the next day researching, not the toy itself, but things that could destroy, unwelcome presences, things that could break connections, salt fire, specific rituals. I felt desperate. My hands trembled as I scrolled through forums and old books. I knew this wasn't just a haunted object anymore. It was something else, something tied to my history, tied to Grandma's house, tied to those buried secrets. That evening the toy was waiting for me, sitting on my bed, its single eye fixed on the door as I walked in. The air in the room was thick, heavy. The whispers were loud, swirling around me, full of malice. I closed the door, took a deep breath. My heart was hammering. I wouldn't run, not anymore. I had to face it. I grabbed a large metal pot from my kitchen, filled it with water, added a ridiculous amount of salt, carried it back to the bedroom. The whispers from the toy intensified, became sharp, angry sounds. The single eye seemed to bore into me. I set the pot on the floor, looked at the toy. It didn't move, just sat there, watching, waiting. I reached for it, my hand shaking. As my fingers closed around its worn fur, I felt an intense cold and a jolt of energy. Dark, malevolent. The whispers shrieked in my mind. A torrent of distorted voices. Images flashed behind my eyes. Fragmented, violent, scenes from the nightmares. Twisted secrets. With a cry, I plunged the toy into the pot of salt water. The water in the pot reacted instantly. It didn't just accept the toy. It seemed to fight it. It bubbled and frothed. Steam rose from the surface, smelling of salt and something burnt. The toy thrashed in my grip. The whispers became a deafening roar, filling the room, filling my mind. The single eye glowed bright red. I felt a searing pain in my hand, spreading up my arm, like the toy was burning me from the inside. I held on, gripping it tightly, keeping it submerged in the salt water. I could feel it struggling, fighting against the water, against the salt, against whatever force the salt water represented. The screaming whispers intensified. The room seemed to shake. Shadows stretched and worked on the walls. The air was thick with energy, malevolent, ancient. I gritted my teeth, holding on. I had to break it, had to destroy it. The screaming reached a peak, a terrible, inhuman sound. The toy stiffened in the water. Its fur seemed to smoke. The red light in its eye flared once, blindingly bright, then died. The screaming stopped. Abruptly, the water in the pot calmed. The frothing subsided. The steam vanished. The air in the room felt normal again. Quieter, less heavy. My hand ached, burned. I looked at the toy. It was still in the pot, soaking wet, its fur matted down. The single button eye was dull, lifeless. It felt inert, just an old, wet, stuffed animal. I pulled it out of the water. It was heavy now, limp. I carried it outside, to the garbage dumpster. I didn't hesitate, didn't look back. I threw it in, closed the lid, walked away. I cleaned my hand. The burning sensation faded, leaving a dull ache. But the lines under my skin, they seemed clearer now. Darker, more defined. The toy was gone. The intense fear lessened. The constant feeling of being watched receded. The nightmares stopped, for a while, but the secrets revealed in the dreams remained. Disturbing truths about my past, about Grandma's house, about things that happened, things I wish I could forget. And the lines under my skin, they are still there. They haven't gone away. They look like faint, dark threads just beneath the surface. Sometimes they seem to spread slightly, or pulsate faintly, especially when I'm tired, or when I think about the toy, or about those secrets. I don't see the toy anymore. I don't hear the whispers, but sometimes late at night, in the silence of my apartment, I hear a faint sound, like old fabric rubbing together, or a quiet sigh, and I feel that familiar prickle on the back of my neck, that sense of being watched. I worry, was the toy the secret, or was it just the keeper of the secret? The vessel, was destroying it enough? Or did I just release whatever was inside? Did the entity find a new place to reside? Did it transfer? I look at my hands, at the lines under my skin. They seem to be part of me now. A permanent reminder, a living secret. And I wonder if the toy's secret isn't really the toy at all. If the secret is something older, something darker, something that attached itself to a child long ago, and has been waiting, biding its time, hiding in the quiet corners of memory, waiting for the toy to be rediscovered, to bring the secret back to life, maybe even into a new body. My body, the lines under my skin, feel strangely warm tonight, and the itching, it's back.